Google Earth has revolutionized the way we look at the world, giving us the opportunity to explore the planet from the comfort of our own homes. And some people have discovered unusual and bizarre places that no one knew existed. Let's count down the top 15 creepiest places found on Google Earth, starting with number 15, the Forest Haven Asylum in Maryland. The Forest Haven Asylum, which is in Laurel in Maryland in the U.S., is a haunting memory of the past and the way that mental health used to be treated in the United States. Opened in 1925, it was originally designed to be a progressive care center for people with intellectual disabilities and meant to be a self-sufficient retreat where they could live, learn, and work in a peaceful setting. As time passed, though, the approach at Forest Haven gradually changed, and by the mid-20th century it turned into an overcrowded and understaffed institution where reports of neglect and abuse were rampant. The living conditions here were terrible, and the lack of adequate medical care and awful treatment became increasingly common, leading to a number of inquiries and lawsuits. Amongst many controversies, investigations revealed systemic neglect, inadequate staffing, and unsanitary conditions, which contributed to the suffering of many residents, and the public outcry over these conditions led to a class action lawsuit in 1976, and eventually a federal court order demanded the closure of the facility. Forest Haven, it was officially closed in 1991, but the buildings still remain there, with decaying structures that are slowly being reclaimed by nature. It's cordoned off and access is limited, but it's become popular with urban explorers wanting to venture into an undeniably creepy place. Number 14, Zikov Castle, Czech Republic. Zikov Castle. It's a stunning historical building that's set above the place where the Vltava and Otava rivers meet in the southern Bohemian region of the Czech Republic. It's played a significant part of Czech history since its construction began in the early 13th century, under the reign of King Otakar I, but there's a dark side to the place too. Featuring an interesting blend of Romanesque and Gothic architectural styles. As it went through a series of construction and renovation stages across the centuries, the massive walls and imposing towers were designed not only to provide plenty of living space, but also for defense, as it served to protect the kingdom's borders and control the important river trade routes. Since being built, it's been home to many Bohemian kings and noble families, each leaving their mark on its structure and history. One of the most distinctive features of this castle is the Royal Palace, which contains the Chapel of St. Wenceslas. This chapel is known for how well preserved it is and the early Gothic frescoes that cover its walls, some of which are among the oldest in Central Europe. The castle also has a mysterious stone known as the Devil's Stone, which according to legend brings bad luck to anyone who moves it from its resting place. With so much history, Zikov is linked to a number of myths and legends, including stories of a ghostly guard who appears when the Czech nation faces danger, and the Zvikovsky Rarasek, a mischievous sprite said to cause disturbances within the walls. These tales have led to it being known as the most haunted place in the country, and one where visitors often experience unnerving events. Number 13, Nagoro Village, Japan. Nagoro Village, which you may know as the Scarecrow Village, is an eerie place in the Iya Valley on the island of Shikoku in Japan. The small, secluded village has become well known around the world because of its unusual population, as instead of seeing people everywhere, you'll see hundreds of scarecrows. The reason for this is a sad story in itself, and the tradition began with Tsukimi Ayano, a local woman who returned to her village after years away and found a community that had dwindled significantly due to young people moving to cities for work. Faced with the loneliness and abandonment that affected many rural villages in Japan, Ayano began making scarecrows to replace her neighbors and friends. Each scarecrow is handcrafted with an incredible level of detail and positioned throughout the village in everyday scenes. You'll find a fisherman by the river, students in classrooms, and old people sitting on benches, all of which are dressed in old clothes, often ones that once belonged to the people they're meant to represent. Over time, the project has grown to include over 350 of them, each placed in various locations around Nagoro, making the village feel both populated and haunting at the same time. Nagoro has become a destination for travelers looking for a strange and creepy experience, with visitors able to walk through what has essentially become an open-air museum. This has, in a way, meant the scarecrows have breathed new life into the village, but it's definitely a strange place to set foot in, or to even explore through Google Earth. Number 12, the Stanley R. Mickelson Safeguard Complex, North Dakota. During the Cold War, communities around the world took precautions just in case the worst happened, and the Stanley R. Mickelson Safeguard Complex is a fascinating but uneasy example of this. Located near the town of Nakoma in North Dakota, it was the first and only operational anti-ballistic missile defense installation in the United States, constructed during the height of the Cold War in the early 1970s. Its purpose was to detect and intercept incoming ballistic missile threats as part of a larger initiative known as the Safeguard Program, which aimed to develop a defense system capable of protecting the United States from a potential nuclear attack. The facility in North Dakota was chosen due to its proximity to the Minuteman missile silos in the area, which were seen as being likely targets in the event of a nuclear conflict. The complex featured a range of advanced radar systems and missile interceptors, including the Missile Site Radar and 4 remote Sprint and Spartan missile launch sites designed to track and destroy incoming missiles. The architecture of the place is complex, and it's unusual, particularly the pyramid-shaped MSR building, which housed the radar and computer systems necessary for the detection and interception. The operational life of the Safeguard Complex was surprisingly short though, having become fully operational in April 1975, but due to high operational costs and strategic limitations, it was decommissioned in February 1976, less than a year later. Today, it's a Cold War relic and a reminder of a period in military history that saw rapid technological advancements and intense geopolitical tensions. The site has since been partially dismantled, though the iconic pyramid remains as a haunting memory of how dangerous those times were thought to be. Number 11. Veijo Ronkainen Sculpture Garden in Finland. Found in Patakala in the southeast of Finland, the Veijo Ronkainen Sculpture Garden was meant to be a welcoming and endearing artistic attraction, but it instead became one of the strangest and sometimes creepiest places you could ever go. It was created by the self-taught artist Veijo Ronkainen, who spent over 50 years populating his garden with nearly 550 concrete sculptures. But despite his extensive practice, he never really managed to perfect the human face. Originally employed as a paper mill worker throughout his life, the artist began creating his garden in 1961 at the age of just 16. Over the decades, he built a world filled with life-sized human figures, each taking on a different expression and pose. These sculptures are depicted in various activities such as playing instruments, dancing, or engaging in yoga poses, and many of them are fitted with real human teeth and eyes made from glass orbs, making them quite odd to look at. Also in the garden are a number of buildings, including the artist's home, and decorated environments that incorporate elements of Finnish folklore and Ronkainen's personal mythology. One of the most interesting features are soundscapes, as some sculptures have internal speakers that play recordings, such as deep breathing, which makes it feel even stranger. Walking through the sculpture garden, you'll experience a combination of wonder and discomfort, getting a glimpse into the artist's inner life and a sense of isolation. Ronkainen rarely left his home and was known to be reclusive, preferring to let his art speak for itself. Number 10. The Clown Motel, Nevada. Nevada is a place where you'll find somewhere to stay that caters to virtually any need you could possibly imagine. But probably the creepiest option is the Clown Motel in Tonopah. With the landscape to one side and the historical Old Tonopah Cemetery to the other, it's best known for its extensive collection of clown memorabilia and themed rooms. First opened in 1985 by Leona and Leroy David, it was initially a tribute to the couple's father, who was an avid clown collector. The motel's lobby is home to over 2,000 clown figurines, paintings, and life-size statues, ranging from delightful to eerie, and from classic circus clowns to more contemporary designs. The collection has grown through the years, largely due to donations from guests and clown enthusiasts, ensuring that no two visits will ever be the same. The motel's closeness to the cemetery, which ended burials in 1911 and houses the graves of many of the original miners, adds in another layer of creepiness to the stay. With guests often reporting strange occurrences and plenty of stories of hauntings both in the motel and in the nearby graveyard, it's this combination of clown theming and ghostly tales that makes it a truly unique place. If you dare stay, each room is clown-themed and named and decorated after famous clowns. There's also a gift shop offering clown memorabilia, giving a chance for visitors to take home a piece of their peculiar experience, as well as booking a space on a ghost tour, which is particularly popular around Halloween. Number 9. Laung Seu, Indonesia. Laung Seu, which translates from Javanese to mean 1,000 doors, is a notoriously haunted building that's in the city of Semarang, which is the capital of Central Java in Indonesia. Its name comes from its design, which features countless doors and windows within the structure, many of which don't actually lead anywhere. Despite the name, there aren't actually 1,000 doors, but you'll rarely see a building with more entrances than this one. Built in 1904 during the Dutch colonial era, it was originally the headquarters of the Dutch East Indies Railway Company. The building was designed by Dutch architect C. Citroen and was a stunning example of colonial-era architecture, combining European aesthetics with local influences. Its construction was completed in 1907, blending Gothic and Roman elements, with high ceilings, large windows, and beautiful stained glass. The building didn't remain as office space for long, though, as during World War II it was taken over by the Japanese forces and used as their main base. This meant that it also served as a site of imprisonment and torture during the time, and the spirits of those who were held there are said to still roam the halls to this very day. After Indonesia proclaimed independence, Laung Seu was repurposed for various different uses, including becoming an office for different Indonesian railway companies. Having witnessed critical periods in Indonesian history, including the struggle for independence and the post-colonial era, it's a hugely important structure. But it's the scars of war and the remnants of its use as a detention facility during the Japanese occupation that have had the biggest impact on the place. Local legends are common, even with efforts to restore it over the past decade. There's a spooky feeling at every turn. It's become a popular tourist attraction, though, with people wanting to see the incredible architecture. But there's no avoiding its creepiness, and it's become the go-to destination in the country for anyone wanting to confront the paranormal. Number 8. Poglia Island, Italy. Venice is, of course, one of the most famous tourist destinations in the world, but the lagoon in which the city is found also has several other islands. One of these is known as Poglia. It's off-limits to visitors because of its complicated past, and it's one of the creepiest places on the planet. The island once had a thriving community, but this all changed in 1348 when the Black Death swept through Europe. Poglia became a quarantine colony as one of the Plague Islands, where the Venetian Republic exiled many of its infected citizens. It's estimated that over the centuries, more than 100,000 people who were sick or suspected of carrying the plague were sent there. And as a result, the island became a mass burial ground, with some estimates suggesting that the soil on Poglia is composed as much as 50% of human ash. The island's dark history didn't end with the plague, though, as it continued being used as a quarantine facility until the late 19th century. And then, in the 1920s, the buildings there were repurposed into an asylum for the mentally ill. According to another legend, a doctor at the facility tortured and performed experiments on the patients, driven by a quest to understand the mysteries of madness. Said to have eventually succumbed to the revenge of the spirits on the island, the asylum was closed in 1968 and completely abandoned. Nature began to reclaim the structures with vines and wildflowers covering the decaying hospital. All of this creates a truly ghostly atmosphere, with the few people who managed to actually set foot on it regretting getting anywhere close. In recent years, the Italian government auctioned a 99-year lease for Poglia in an attempt to raise revenue, suggesting the island could be redeveloped into a vacation or commercial destination. However, resistance from local communities and the continued paranormal activity has put a stop to those ideas, and for now, it remains empty. Moving on to number 7, Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia. Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania first opened in 1829 on the outskirts of the city, and at the time it was seen as an architectural wonder and a completely new approach to how prisons were built. It was designed by John Haviland. The Gothic structure was conceived with the intent of inspiring penitence, which is why it was called a penitentiary, and it introduced a new model of solitary confinement based on Quaker ideas. The philosophy guiding Eastern State was one of solitary confinement that allowed inmates time to reflect upon their crimes, something they believed would help their moral reform. Each inmate was housed in an individual cell with a skylight representing the Eye of God, and the design included private outdoor spaces attached to each cell where prisoners could exercise alone, maintaining their physical and mental health without the corruption that was thought to come from mingling with other inmates. This system of isolation was referred to as the Pennsylvania System or Separate System and became quite influential, with many other prisons around the world being based on it. However, the practice of solitary confinement eventually came under scrutiny, with critics arguing that it led to mental harm rather than rehabilitation. By the early 20th century, eastern states slowly abandoned its solitary system due to overcrowding and changing philosophies towards how prisoners should be treated, and transitioned towards a system more similar to those seen in modern prisons. While it was open, Eastern State housed some notorious criminals, including bank robber Willie Sutton and most famously Al Capone, whose luxuriously finished cell contrasted sharply with the stark conditions experienced by other inmates. It was, though, eventually closed in 1971 after 142 years of continuous use. The abandonment led to the building's rapid deterioration until, in 1994, it was reopened as a museum and historic site. Now it remains a reminder of the changing approaches to prisons over time, and an undeniably creepy place to visit when you feel the cold isolation around you that countless prisoners experienced, often with no hope of ever leaving. Number 6. Scott's Hut, Antarctica. Located on the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica and built in 1911 during the British Antarctic Expedition, also known as the Terra Nova Expedition, Scott's Hut was constructed to be the base for Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his team as they took on their mission to become the first to reach the geographic South Pole. Things ended tragically, though, when they failed to return from the pole in 1912, but their hut remains in place as a monument to a time when exploration involved extreme bravery and huge risks. The hut is a timber structure built from prefabricated panels that were designed to withstand the extreme conditions of the Antarctic. The design and construction were based on the principles learned from the people who lived in the Arctic, optimized to retain heat and resist the fierce winds and chilling temperatures that the region's known for. Inside, the hut was divided into various sections including living quarters, a kitchen, and a storage area, and it was stocked with provisions, scientific equipment, and personal items. The hut is remarkably well preserved, with contents that are almost exactly as they were left by the Terra Nova expedition over a century ago. Inside, you can still see the beds, reindeer sleeping bags, clothing, and even a box of Huntley and Palmer's biscuits. Scientific instruments, tools, and personal objects are still there, frozen in time, so it's like stepping into the past. The isolation and extreme cold have helped preserve the hut and its contents, although the site faces threats from increased tourist activity and climate change. Conservation efforts are ongoing to ensure its preservation as both a historical site, but it's also been meticulously imaged by Google, so instead of traveling all the way there, you're better off just exploring it from the warmth and comfort of your own home. Number 5. Airplane Boneyard, Mojave Air and Spaceport in California. The Mojave Air and Spaceport in California is a hub for aerospace innovation and development, but it's also home to one of the most fascinating and creepy places related to aviation, the Airplane Boneyard. Deep within the Mojave Desert, this boneyard is a retirement home for hundreds of aircraft that have reached the end of their service life. The desert's dry conditions and hard-pan soil make it an ideal location for storing them, as it prevents corrosion and preserves the aircraft in a state suitable for potential reuse or salvage. Spanning several acres, the Mojave Boneyard is a bizarre landscape filled with rows upon rows of parked airplanes, ranging from small private jets to massive commercial airliners. Some have been stored whole for potential future use, but others are destined for parts reclamation or recycling. The sight of these decommissioned planes, though, can be strangely somber. Each was in service for decades, making thousands of flights, transporting millions of passengers, and visiting all corners of the globe. And this final resting place sums up the transient nature of transport technology and the human impact on our planet. It's not somewhere you can just visit, though, meaning the best way to see it in all its glory is through mapping services. This is because some of the aircraft being held here still contain classified or extremely valuable components, and it's on a private site that has commercial interests. Alongside the Boneyard, the Mojave Air and Spaceport operates as a pioneering facility for the aerospace industry, hosting companies that test and develop new aircraft, space vehicles, and associated tech. This has created a unique contrast between the old and deteriorating with the cutting edge and new, further piquing the interest of photographers, aviation enthusiasts, and plenty more people. Number 4. Spree Park Amusement Park, Berlin, Germany. Around the world, theme parks aim to be some of the happiest and joyful places you can visit, but both because of the state it's currently in and the criminal behavior of its creator, the Spree Park amusement park in Berlin, Germany is the complete opposite of what it set out to be. Originally, it was known as Kulturpark Plantewald when it opened in 1969. It's along the banks of the River Spree and operated under East German control until the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. It was the only amusement park in East Berlin, covering 73 acres and attracting up to 1.7 million visitors a year at its peak. After German reunification, Spree Park was taken over by Norbert Witte and his family, who transformed and rebranded it. The park introduced more Western-style attractions, including a giant Ferris wheel, roller coasters, water rides, and an English village. But despite these efforts, they soon began to struggle financially. Attendance dwindled with the increased competition from elsewhere and poor management decisions. And by 2001, the park was forced to close its gates, leaving rides and attractions to fall into a state of disrepair. Following the park's downfall, Norbert Witte secretly shipped some of the most valuable rides to Lima, Peru, supposedly for repair and renovation. Instead, he attempted to open a new amusement park in Lima, which ultimately failed. And then in 2004, he was caught trying to smuggle almost 400 pounds of cocaine from Peru to Germany in the masts of the Flying Carpet ride, which led to his imprisonment. Since its closure, Spree Park has become a destination for urban explorers and photographers, drawn by its continual decay and the surreal sight of its rusting attractions that are being reclaimed by nature. In recent years, there's been a renewed interest in the park, and the Berlin government purchased the site in 2014, with plans to rejuvenate it while preserving its historical and cultural significance. Part of the proposal involved restoring some of the original rides, too, adding modern attractions and providing spaces for cultural events. But this is, of course, a massively costly project, so for now, it remains off-limits, except through Google Earth. Number 3. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia in Pennsylvania in the United States is a near ghost town that's become more famous for its underground coal mine fire than for its history or the small number of residents who still live there. Located in Columbia County, Centralia was once a bustling place, benefiting from the riches that came from the large coal deposits in the area. The town was settled in 1841 and incorporated in 1866, and at its peak had several thousand residents, as well as plenty of businesses, schools, and churches. Fortunes began to change for the town, though, and its residents in 1962, with a series of events that couldn't be recovered from. A fire was lit in a landfill near the entrance to an abandoned coal mine to clean up the site, which, while it may sound extreme, was actually a common practice. That backfired, however, when the fire ignited an exposed vein of anthracite coal, and when efforts to extinguish the fire failed, it spread through the extensive network of mines underneath the town. This fire has been burning ever since, moving beneath the town, opening sinkholes and releasing harmful gas. The environmental impact and safety concerns led to intervention by the government, and in 1983, Congress allocated more than $42 million for relocation efforts. By 1992, the Pennsylvania governor invoked eminent domain on all property in the town, which was a controversial move but was upheld by the courts in 1993. Today, Centralia is essentially abandoned, with only a few people remaining, refusing to leave their family homes despite the risks. The streets that were once alive with miners and their families are now mostly overgrown with vegetation, with smoke occasionally still rising from the cracked earth, a continual reminder of the ongoing fire below. With the fumes that are being released by the fires deep beneath the ground, though, it's not exactly safe to be there for too long without the risk of developing long-term health conditions. Number 2. Bangar Fort, India. Bangar Fort, which is in the Alwar district of Rajasthan in India, is said to be the most haunted place in the country. Located at the edge of the Sariska Tiger Reserve, the fort is surrounded by hills and it's steeped in legend and mysteries. It was built in the 17th century and was a great example of the medieval Indian fortifications that were typical in Rajasthan at that time. The fort complex includes temples, palaces, and multiple gates, each intricately designed with the architectural style of the period. Among these, the most impressive structures are the temples, which feature beautiful stone carvings that have remained in surprisingly good condition to this day. According to local legend, though, the fort is terribly cursed. The story centers on a wizard named Singia, who fell hopelessly in love with a beautiful princess. Knowing that his love was unrequited, he attempted to use magic to win her heart. The princess, however, saw through his plans and found a way to turn the spell against him. In his last breath, the wizard cursed Bangar, dooming it to destruction and desolation. Not long after, Bangar Fort was attacked and sacked by invaders from neighboring states, leading to its abandonment, and the locals now believe the fort is haunted by the restless spirits of those who fell victim to the curse. What makes the fort really unusual is that despite welcome visitors, authorities have expressly banned visitors from being there between sunset and sunrise because of the dangers of the hauntings, making it one of the only places in the world that paranormal activity has been confirmed by a government. This, of course, only tempts more people to the place to try to experience all the ghoulish happenings for themselves, as well as taking in the splendor of the architecture, with the bizarre royal palace and several temples still looking like they did originally. Number 1. The Darvaza Gas Crater, Turkmenistan. If you ever wondered where the door to hell might be located, then the answer is probably the creepiest place on Earth, and can be found in the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan. Officially known as the Darvaza Gas Crater, this geological anomaly has worryingly been burning continuously since 1971 and shows no signs of ending. The story of how this happened dates back to the late 1960s to early 70s, when Turkmenistan was still part of the Soviet Union. Soviet engineers were searching for resources when they stumbled upon a cavern filled with natural gas. The ground beneath the investigating rig collapsed, though, creating a large hole with a diameter about 230 feet and a depth of about 66 feet. Fearing the release of poisonous gas, the engineers decided to burn off the gas, believing that the subsequent fire would extinguish within a few weeks. So, according to reports, they set it alight with a couple of grenades. As soon as they found, however, that it was a much larger deposit of gas in the area, and the fire has raged ever since. It's located about 160 miles north of Ashgabat, the capital city of Turkmenistan. The Darvaza Gas Crater is surrounded by eerie, almost apocalyptic landscape. The fire inside the crater lights up the night sky with an ominous glow. The heat near the crater is intense too, and the smell of burning sulfur can be overwhelming. Despite its popularity, especially as it's one of the only major tourist attractions in the country, there are real concerns about the long-term damage that the crater is causing. Recently, there's been discussions by the Turkmen government about extinguishing the fire or exploiting the area's gas reserves more effectively. But so far, such initiatives have yet to materialize, mostly because no one can agree or know for certain quite how to extinguish a blaze like this. It's likely then that it'll continue to be a creepy burning crater for many years to come, being both a fascinating place to visit, but also a reminder of how destructive human activity can be without proper management or environmental awareness. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you to our channel members.